The world, at the dawn of the 20th century, was a place of frantic change and boundless ambition. Empires spanned the globe, new technologies were shrinking distances, and the human spirit was pushing against every known frontier. Yet, one vast continent remained a mystery, a blank space on the map marked only by ice and speculation. This was Antarctica, the last unconquered wilderness on Earth. To be the first to stand at its southernmost point, the geographic South Pole, was more than just an achievement. It was the ultimate prize in an age obsessed with exploration, a symbol of national pride and human endurance that captured the imagination of millions around the world. Roald Amundsen was a master of strategy, not just in the wild, but in the world of public perception and funding. To the world, and even to most of his own crew, his destination was not the South Pole at all. His declared mission was the North Pole. However, in the shadows, news arrived that would change everything. Two American explorers, Frederick Cook and Robert Peary, both claimed to have reached the North Pole in 1908 and 1909. While their claims were debated and mired in controversy, the allure of being the first was suddenly gone. He made a secret, high-stakes decision. Without informing his sponsors, the Norwegian government, or even the majority of his hand-picked crew, he changed his target. The North could wait. The new destination was the last great unclimbed summit of exploration, the South Pole. The race to the South Pole would become a story defined by two starkly different men, each leading their nation's hopes into the desolate Antarctic wilderness. On one side was Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian outsider. He was a professional polar explorer, a pragmatist who had spent his life learning from the Inuit people of the Arctic. On the other side was Captain Robert Falcon Scott of the British Royal Navy. Scott was the embodiment of the British imperial spirit. He was a naval officer, a gentleman, and a romantic hero in the eyes of the public. His previous Antarctic expedition had made him a national celebrity, despite falling short of the pole. The contrast in their methods was profound and would ultimately prove decisive. Amundsen placed his faith in what he knew worked: skis for rapid travel, and, most importantly, teams of skilled sled dogs. Scott, however, was skeptical of dogs, viewing them as difficult to handle. Roald Amundsen's preparation was a masterclass in polar logistics, a symphony of foresight and practical wisdom. He was a man who left nothing to chance. Having spent years living among the Inuit people in the Arctic, he understood that success in such a brutal environment wasn't about conquering nature, but about working with it. The heart of his plan was canine. Amundsen assembled a team of nearly 100 of the finest Greenland sled dogs. These weren't just animals to him, they were engines, companions, and a crucial part of his survival calculus. Their equipment was equally well considered. Amundsen and his men wore gear based on Inuit designs, made from reindeer skin and seal skin. These materials were light, warm, and breathable, preventing the buildup of sweat that could freeze and lead to deadly hypothermia. Meanwhile, Captain Robert Falcon Scott's expedition, the Terra Nova expedition, was a far grander and more complex affair. It was a mission of national importance, backed by the Royal Geographical Society and the British government. Its goals were twofold: to be the first to the South Pole, and to conduct extensive scientific research. Scott's plan for reaching the pole was ambitious, and in hindsight, tragically flawed. The motor sledges quickly broke down in the extreme cold, their engines unable to cope. The ponies, while strong, were ill-suited to the Antarctic environment. The final push to the pole, however, would be undertaken by the men themselves. They would pull their own sledges, a backbreaking method known as man-hauling, which was seen as a more noble and heroic way to achieve the goal. The rivalry, which had been brewing in the minds of the men and the pages of newspapers, became starkly real in February 1911. Scott's ship, the Terra Nova, arrived at the Bay of Whales to explore a potential landing site. To their absolute astonishment, they saw another ship already anchored there. It was Amundsen's Fram. The secret was out. This news was a bombshell for Scott and his team. They now knew they were in a direct race. The psychological pressure mounted instantly. Scott wrote in his diary, "It is a terrible disappointment. I am very sorry for the Norwegian venture. Amundsen is a man of considerable experience of Arctic traveling. he is sure to be quick and to get through. Both teams spent the Antarctic winter of 1911 in darkness, confined to their huts, making final preparations. At Framheim, Amundsen's men worked tirelessly, modifying sledges, checking harnesses, and sorting tons of supplies with factory-like precision. At Cape Evans, Scott's team also prepared, but their time was divided between scientific work and preparing for the polar journey. Having successfully laid their depots and endured the forced rest after their false start, Amundsen's reorganized team set out for the pole in earnest on the 20th of October 1911. The 5 chosen men, Amundsen, Olaf Bjaaland, Helmer Hansen, Sverre Hassel, and Oscar Wisting, along with 4 sledges and 52 elite dogs, made swift progress across the familiar flatness of the Ross ice shelf. After weeks of rapid travel, they reached the foothills of the colossal Transantarctic Mountains, the great frozen barrier separating the low ice shelf from the high polar plateau. Here, Amundsen's gamble began. Instead of taking the longer known route of the Beardmore Glacier, he steered his team towards an uncharted area, searching for a new, more direct passage. What they found was a gigantic glacier, steeper and more treacherous than they could have imagined. They named it the Axel Heiberg Glacier. The ascent was a brutal, terrifying ordeal, a near-vertical climb up a chaotic cascade of ice filled with hidden crevasses and towering icefalls. They navigated a terrifying maze of deep, gaping crevasses, which Amundsen grimly named the Devil's Ballroom. Emerging onto the high polar plateau was like entering another world. They were now at an altitude of over 10,000 feet, on a seemingly endless, featureless expanse of white that stretched to every horizon. The air was thin and bitingly cold, and the sun circled endlessly in the sky, creating a disorienting, timeless void. Despite the challenges, Amundsen's team pressed on with relentless determination. The remaining dogs, now pulling much lighter sledges, found their rhythm, and the men, expert skiers all, settled into a steady, ground-covering pace. Their progress became a masterclass in polar efficiency. By early December, they knew they were close. Their daily navigational readings showed the latitude numbers ticking steadily upwards. 89 degrees, and 30 minutes, 89 degrees and 45 minutes. The excitement in the small party was almost unbearable, a quiet electric tension that filled the small tent each evening. On the afternoon of December 14th, 1911, Helmer Hansen, who was skiing just a bit ahead of the others, suddenly stopped. He turned to his companions and said quietly, "I think we have arrived." The team halted. A quick check of their instruments confirmed their position. After years of dreaming and months of brutal effort, they had done it. They were standing at the geographic South Pole. There was no dramatic fanfare, no thunderous applause, only the sound of the wind and the panting of their dogs. The landscape was indistinguishable from the hundreds of kilometers they had just crossed, a flat, white, and utterly desolate plain at the bottom of the world. Their first action was to plant their flags, the Norwegian flag and the flag of the Fram, their silk colors snapping smartly in the constant polar wind. They spent 3 days at the site, not just to rest, but to make absolutely certain of their position. In an age before GPS, pinpointing the exact pole was a significant navigational challenge. They used their instruments to take observations of the sun's position over a 24-hour period, skiing out in different directions from their central camp to box the pole and ensure their claim was indisputable. The journey to the pole had been a triumph of planning and execution, but their task was only half complete. Reaching the goal was one thing, surviving the 1,400-kilometer return journey was another. With the wind at their backs and a trail of meticulously marked depots to guide them, the 5 Norwegians began their race back to the coast. Their mood was light, buoyed by the immense satisfaction of their victory. The system that had brought them to the pole with such efficiency now worked in reverse, guiding them home with the same clockwork precision. The journey north was a stark contrast to the heroic suffering that defined so many other polar tales. On January 25, 1912, exactly 99 days after they had set out, the 5 men skied back into their base camp at Framheim. They were not gaunt, frostbitten wrecks on the verge of collapse. They were healthy, strong, and had even gained weight during their travels. Their success was absolute and undeniable. While Amundsen and his men were making their triumphant return, Captain Scott and his 4 companions were enduring a very different fate. They reached the South Pole on January 17, 1912, 34 days after the Norwegians. Their arrival was not a moment of victory, but one of soul-crushing disappointment. There, fluttering in the wind, was the Norwegian flag, and inside the tent left by Amundsen was the letter confirming their defeat. The news was a devastating psychological blow to men who were already exhausted, undernourished, and suffering from the brutal effects of the cold. The return journey for the British party was a slow, agonizing descent into hell. Scott, Wilson, and Bowers pushed on for a few more days before being trapped by a relentless blizzard just 11 miles from their next supply depot. There, in their tent, they wrote their final letters and diaries before freezing to death. In the decades that followed, the legacies of the 2 men were debated and redefined. For many years, Captain Scott was revered as the true hero. Amundsen, in contrast, was often portrayed as a cold, calculating professional. History, however, is a patient judge. As the years passed and polar exploration became a science rather than a romantic quest, a more objective assessment began to emerge. Historians and modern polar explorers re-examined the expeditions, and Amundsen's genius was finally given its due. His meticulous planning, his deep understanding of the environment, his willingness to learn from indigenous cultures, and his innovative use of skis and dogs were recognized as the keys to his success. Today, more than a century later, the story of Amundsen and Scott remains one of history's most compelling dramas. It is a tale that teaches us that in the great wildernesses of our world, it is not just courage or spirit that ensures survival, but also wisdom, preparation, and humility. Roald Amundsen's victory was not just a race won, it was a lesson taught. He showed the world that nature is not an enemy to be conquered through brute force, but a powerful force to be understood and respected. His triumph was the ultimate testament to a simple, profound truth. The ones who adapt are the ones who endure.